Welcome to this week's edition of God, Coffee, and COVID, produced by the Swift Current Ministerial Association. And I'm happy to have with me Joel Hogan of the Community Baptist Church and Brian Bezenson of Trailview Alliance. And great to have you with on this podcast today. And our topic today is separating truth from fiction among all the COVID information and misinformation. And fake news has been a topic that's been going around for a number of years now. But with a topic like COVID, it's perhaps even more important to get accurate information for all concerned. And perhaps to start off with, our first question, when dealing with a situation like COVID, why is accurate information so critical?
Well, I think the biggest reason is because there's so many people, especially during this pandemic, that are riddled with anxiety and fear, uncertainty. We have know of a young mom that's, she's paralyzed. And the whole point is with accurate information, there's a greater sense of hope and of peace, whereas with the misinformation, it just piles on the fear and the unknowns to a point where people can't breathe almost.
And of course, dealing with accurate information is important too, even as far as making decisions, right? So, as we've been working through this over the last few months, the information, of course, is finally getting better and better. I've equated it to being in the fog of war. You really, at early on stages, you really don't know how it's going to react. You do have previous coronaviruses that have existed in our society, MERS and SARS-1, they're calling this one SARS-2. But yet every one of those still causes different problems and different issues. And so as they were working this through, it's so important that they get the data. At the beginning, you really can't. So you have to sort of take, as we all have seen, the worst case scenario and work your way backwards. The data has been wonderful now as we're getting information. We're seeing that, wait a minute, there are some very large lights at the end of these tunnels. We're seeing that the young are really not getting affected very much at all, but we're also seeing that it's still a pretty big risk for those who are health compromised and especially our elderly. So, those are important things for making decisions. And if you don't have the right data, you make bad decisions. So it's crucial to have the right data.
And I've heard a number of stories of people both perhaps being a little bit too lax in precautions, as well as some who are being actually overly cautious to the point of paralysis almost. In terms
for sure.
Of staying in their home and hardly ever even venturing outside the door.
Yeah, well, we've got two couples of missionaries in Bolivia, and they're so scared. The government is so scared that they're not even allowed out of their apartments except for one morning a week. Like, they are trapped. Wow. And again, the government is operating more on fear than they are on data. And they're even after 2.5 solid months now. Can you imagine? And the data is pretty clear that if you're outside, there's very little chance of outside, but they're not even allowed to go for walks. So, data is important. And if you don't have that information, or if you're working on bad information, it makes you have bad decisions or base your decisions on either fear or recklessness.
And I guess when dealing with a situation like COVID, why is sometimes misinformation so appealing? We're almost drawn to it like a moth to a flame.
Well, fear is a wonderful motivator for you to come up with stuff. And so, when bad things happen and you really don't have a proper explanation, or you don't have a known explanation yet, then immediately you start looking for excuses. In the olden days, they would say that, the gods must be mad at you, right? So, but people will also use those situations for their own political gain. I think back to the early church, Nero, when Rome burnt down, instead of actually finding out what actually caused it, he decided to blame the Christians for doing it on purpose. And that was a huge conspiracy that caused all kinds of Christians to be persecuted immensely. And that was, of course, not based on fact. But when you are looking for either fearful excuses or reasons that maybe make your big world system a little bit scarier, or a scapegoat, either one of those can cause some huge problems.
Yeah. Well, and I think sometimes, I mean, when you look at Facebook and how people use it, without realizing that sometimes their comments, they don't understand that those comments go viral
Mhm.
as soon as they're out there. And so they say certain things, and it may not even be about COVID. It could be a smaller thing. We had an incident years ago where somebody put out some information and they didn't realize that some of our people could see it. And it created a firestorm, and I had to figure out how, because what was being said wasn't accurate. It wasn't true. But I think this is some of the stuff where everyone feels like they have a voice and they can say whatever they want. Well, but they don't realize sometimes what they're saying, who's listening, and who's actually buying into it, or who's going, whoa, no.
Yeah, and I remember, as a kid, these kinds of sort of misinformation things would travel around quite readily, but always by mail. All right, and so it took a while for them to get around. I remember the letter I got as a kid. Procter and Gamble is owned by the Moonies because there's a moon in their logo. Remember that one? So that makes sense. Total sense. They're complete. It's this one world government, or this organization that's pulling the strings of the entire world. And of course, the vast majority of the time, it's when things go crazy. Like when you think about 9/11, all of a sudden everybody was saying, "Oh, this was an orchestrated event." No, it was just people who were being lax, or perhaps just not on top of the ball, or it just happens because people were making bad actions. That answer doesn't resound with our hearts, right? It's like, we've got to have a reason, we've got to have a conspiracy there. A lot of times, people just aren't that smart.
Yeah,
and yes, you're right. In today's world, what used to take weeks because of just regular mail, now with the click of a mouse, it goes around the world, and it just multiplies. And yes, and I don't want to linger on it too long, but is there an outrageous COVID story that has made you chuckle, or that has been particularly interesting to you?
I'll let Brian go first on this one.
I think when it first kind of started to unravel in the first week, I believe it was, I heard a theory or a story presented that somebody from North Korea, like Kim Jong-un, sent somebody from North Korea into China and did so that they would spread and get legs. And and it was quite interesting.
I never heard
Again,
that one.
Not based on fact, just based on speculation, but.
Yeah, I never heard that one. That's a good one. There's another one too. I love technology, and everybody's got their phones. The 5G causes the virus. You can't. That's actually impossible. Or the mimicking of virus. It's impossible. Absolutely impossible. And when you understand radio wave technology, you realize that all those radio waves are still below the radio waves we get from sunlight. So it doesn't make sense. So, but yet that grabs traction with somebody. That's the craziest one I've heard. But I mean, there's quite a few crazy ones.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking of the same 5G story, Joel. I read where, I think it was in Britain, where 6 5G towers were set on fire.
Oh my goodness.
We're trying to prevent COVID.
Well, the funny thing is, 5G towers are only going to be used in urban settings. They're useless in the rural settings because they don't have enough range. And of course, COVID transmits mostly in urban settings because people are in tight environments. So it makes, but 5G itself is a terrible, we'll never see it in Saskatchewan out in the country because it has no range whatsoever. So anyways, there's my story, but you're right, Don. Correlation and causation are a tough one, right?
No. And what, just a few thoughts. What would be your best suggestion to people in terms of being able to intelligently, accurately separate truth from fiction, so we can all stay on top of what we really need to do, or not do?
Well, the answer is just come and talk to me, and I'll tell you. I'll set you straight.
Yeah, Joel knows it all. I know that.
There's a couple of underlying things. One, we have to understand the media, and actually the politicians too, not on purpose, I don't think, but the media, they do better where they producing fear. Fear produces clicks. Fear produces votes. Believe it or not, if you can assuage people's fears or hope, that is. So that's the little bit of a narrative that we have to always keep in the back of our mind. Second thing is, do some proper thinking on things. Some things that come out, some people will start naming them conspiracy theories, but then later on, there's a little bit of truth. So you remember it started in a Chinese lab. Well, that's a conspiracy theory. Well, it turns out that an accidental, and I'm going to say that there's not really any evidence that would be on purpose, because it doesn't achieve any purpose for China. But if it's an accidental release, that's, even if it was somebody doing the whole bat thing, that's still someone doing something stupid. It can happen. And as you looked at, okay, so that was a big conspiracy theory for a minute, but then as evidence began to roll in, you start to evaluate it. Okay, so maybe there is a portion of truth there, but what's behind it? Are you thinking there's a malicious overall intent? You've then moved into the area of conspiratoriality. Is that a word? Conspiratoriality? So it's just a matter of evaluating. And when you're looking for, remember in the church ministry, people were finding demons everywhere. Remember Smurfs were demons, in TV shows. If you start looking for demons everywhere, you're going to start finding them. The devil loves it when you ignore him. The devil loves it when you think he's everywhere and doing everything. Yeah. Sometimes standing back, okay, wait a minute. Let's just evaluate this correctly. Let's allow the truth. We know truth is one of the things the Bible tells us to be looking for. Whatever is true, focus on those things, whatever is right. So truth is good, but don't allow yourself to start connecting dots that really is inappropriate to connect. And I mean, again, throughout history, people are always coming up with conspiracy theories. And again, you just watch the news. CNN goes on and on, or Fox News goes on and on. They all find their own version of a conspiracy theory and they just jump on them. It's tough for us to weed out that stuff.
But that's what sells, right?
Yep.
Which is unfortunate. But, and I think the critical thing too is to listen to those that have the expertise in the field that can relate that data, that information correctly and in a way that's going to give an honest representation of what's out there. Like, I mean, again, you watch different news programs, they have certain people that are quite credible, like a Dr. Fauci or what's her name? Bricks, I think was her last name, and they both had pretty solid information. Plus they were experts in their fields. So, finding those kind of people that you can, that they know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, again, the media or the politics or whatever kind of overwhelmed some of that. But again, it's trying to figure out with a discerning mind what's accurate and then going with that and focusing on that instead of all the other stuff.
Yeah. Nuance is tough though, right? Because in any kind of these discussions, again, because we're in the fog of war, data is coming in, different experts are coming up with different things. Like, I mean, even if you follow the ones that we sort of, hang our hats on, they would say one thing one week, and then as the data kept coming in, they changed their mind. And that's really tough. But that's because we were in this transitional thing. There's one lady that I'd like to suggest. Her name's AJ Roberts, Anjanette Robertson over at reasons.org. She worked on the SARS-1 virus, which was back 20 years ago. That was her thing. She has a great way of explaining things, and also from a Christian perspective. She really always brings in the Christian perspective on these things. So AJ Roberts over at reasons.org is a wonderful resource, and she's put together some wonderful discussions and some reflections, biblical reflections on dealing with the science part of it. But nuance is tough. Science. Science, I mean, one virologist says one thing, another virologist says, and they're both credible, but yet because, only hindsight is kind of relatively perfect, right? And, you err on the side of caution, which is fine, but you also need to be able to see a path forward after the data starts coming in. But, what are we into this? 3 months now, guys? 3 months?
3 months.
The data is pretty good now. It's coming in pretty good, but there's still a lot of questions. And, and of course, people are worried about the fall. And people keep talking about second waves and all this stuff. And, coronaviruses themselves, there's only been about 6 or 7 for them to research in the past. And a lot of them just disappeared before they could really do some good research. SARS-1 being that a prime example. In fact, companies were trying to get vaccines ready to go for SARS-1, but then the crazy thing disappeared. So then they all quit. So here's a good conspiracy theory. So someone looks up the patents from 17 years ago. Goes, oh, look, there's a coronavirus patent there. This is a plan. No, they were working on SARS-1. And
I think I think you both have raised the issue of being aware of sources.
Yeah.
My wife, as a nurse, has always saying to me, like, check that it's a credible source. Now, and as you say, sometimes two credible virologists will have slightly different opinions, but at least if we're trying to stick to, credible sources rather than ABC, buy my COVID medicine, it'll help us to know which to do. And we know that at the end, we're going to come out of all this, and it'll have been a learning experience. But yeah, we have to try to stay on top and look at the best info we can get. Before we close off, any last comments from either one?
Yeah. Like I said, nuance is tough. Like we are not geared for making nuance. The nuance I'm saying is, having desperate information or disparate advice. We love it when people just tell us the way it is. That's why us preachers are so popular. but during times of indecision, and and you can go back to wartime. If you're a guy in the front lines in the Ardennes forest, in the Battle of the Bulge, you literally are in the fog of where there was fog all over the place. You don't know the big picture, and the generals have only the picture from their own side, right? And even they're making decisions. It's not until after the fact you can really evaluate. But then, our prayer should be, Lord, through this thing, give us an understanding so that in the future we can make better choices early on, right? And I think that would be a wonderful result of all this. Is like, hey, what are the choices that we could have made early on that would have made a difference? What are the choices that were really out of our hand and we just had to let things play out? But that's only going to be learned from a good historical perspective, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Joel and Brian, for being part of this podcast today. And I just want to thank everyone who's going to join us, listen, watch, or whatever. And we pray that everybody has a good day, and God bless you all.
All right. Thanks very much, Don. See you, Brian.